Jeder redet gerade über KI. Und das ist ja auch richtig so, ja? Weil KI natürlich alles verändert in unserer Welt. Und zwar nicht nur die Welt der Computer, sondern sogar die Welt des Essens, also die Welt der Lebensmittel. Und genau deshalb habe ich heute eine besondere Frau hierher eingeladen, die heißt Joanna Lepore. Bis vor ganz kurzer Zeit war sie noch bei McDonald's in den USA Global Director Foresight, also Chef-Zukunftsforscherin. Und sie hat FIG gegründet. FIG ist ein Netzwerk der Foresight-Experten, der Chef-Zukunftsforscher der größten Unternehmen dieser Welt. Und dann kehrte sie zurück von Chicago, wo sie gelebt hat, nach Australien in ihr Heimatland und jetzt arbeitet sie für Future-Institute auf der ganzen Welt. Und heute, exklusiv für dich, ist sie hier. Hier ist Joanna Lepore.
I switch into English because, of course, AI is not only changing the sales processes, it's changing everything, and even the food. And today we have the great pleasure to have on this stage Joanna Lepore. Until a few weeks ago, Joanna was the global director foresight. This is the right term of McDonald's, and previously Mars and so on. And so she's a real futurist. She is coming now from Australia because she left McDonald's and moved home to Australia. And yesterday she flew in from Australia, and now she is here to present us the predictions, what will be the future of food, what influence, what effect AI will have on the future of food. Joanna, please join me on stage. Let's sit down. This would be your seat.
Thank you. Can I say one thing?
Absolutely.
Guten Tag.
Ah.
Thank you. Dankeschön. That's it. That's all I know.
What brought you from US to Australia again?
Yeah, so I was actually born in Poland, so don't let the Australian accent fool you. Born and raised in Poland. So I was like debating whether to start talking in Polish because everyone's talking in German and I can't understand anything. And then I grew up and lived most of my life in Australia, and that's where most of my business background is in the Australian market or in the APAC market. And then for 4 years, I had the pleasure of going and creating and leading Foresight for Mars out of New Jersey and McDonald's out of Chicago. I promised my husband that it would be 2 years, and when we got up to 4 years, he said, okay, when are we going home? So it was a family decision to stop missing all of those major milestones with my family and friends.
And why did you get into food? Are you more a foodie or more a technician or more a business model?
It was a complete accident, but I've been in food for 15 years. In CPG, so I've worked in the dairy category, ready-to-go meals, ready-to-go drinks, coffee, chocolate, confectionery, burgers, so all the fun categories. And you can imagine, like, my favorite part was always when we had to taste test the products. Yeah. But it's a really dynamic industry, the food industry, because as you can obviously, intuitively tell, food brings people together. It's so much a part of what makes us human, but it's also facing tremendous challenges. So big food companies are really thinking about, how do we create something that will last for the next 100, 200 years in the current very complex climate. So it's a really meaty challenge.
Yeah. And bringing people together, this is also something what drives you. I learned that you brought all the chief foresight people from the big organizations together. I think it's called FIG, right?
Yes.
Foresight
Inside
Group. Yeah. So 20 or 25 big corporates from all over the world. You got together. But the question is, this foresight role in a big company. What is it? What is this role? what are all these people are doing in their organizations?
They're all doing something different, which is a part of the reason why I started the network, because we found that we were sort of very isolated, which I think it just happens in any industry or any field that you're in. But the idea was, you know, if you're one person, this is a real example, one person in Nestle trying to get this very old, massive organization to accept that the future is complex and uncertain, how can you learn from someone from Shell, who is another member, who has obviously had it since the 1970s, and it's a very well adopted practice with a team of 30. So, you know, the variance in how foresight is practiced is really what the benefit is of the network. And I think we're all wanting to be better and more impactful with our work and learn from each other and ultimately, you know, make the world a better place.
Okay, so now we have the extreme pleasure to have all this knowledge from the big organizations in the world on this stage, and you will be talking about the future of food, right?
Yeah. Exactly. After lunch, thankfully, not before lunch. That would be dangerous.
Perfect. So this is your stage. Thanks for being here.
Okay. All right, so what I'm going to talk to you about is obviously the future of food, and the ask was 2035, what's in store, and what I saw online was that actually some of the best predictions, or the most accurate predictions, get listed on the website. So I'm hoping that I get something right here, but I'm going to talk to you about the shifting food landscape. And so I want to kind of deviate for 1 second here, because I know that often when we talk about industry transformation, we talk about something like Henry Ford and what he did with assembly line inside of the automotive industry. But little known fact, the assembly line actually started not in automotive, but in food. And quite more accurately, it was called the disassembly line. So inside of Chicago in the late 1800s. The reason I say this is for two reasons. One is that the food industry has innovated tremendously across a variety of different industries and has really transformed how we live in a way that I think is really underappreciated. The second reason is that when we talk about the future of food, we always look back to the past to start. The past is really our only evidence of the future. We'll talk about that. So this is something that we use inside of Foresight called the Futures Triangle, which essentially helps us to weigh the weight of the past and, you know, why things are the way that they are, the push of the present, so some of the factors that are really in play right now, and then the pull of the future, so some of the signs of what's coming. So it's really helpful for us when we're investigating a topic like the future of food to be able to weigh all of these three things, but it's also really helpful when we're trying to understand why certain decisions are made. So you can think about, you know, sometimes a decision in the past, or even anchored in the past, is because we have a reputation to upkeep. You know, we have a familiarity or an equity that we're trying to maintain. Inside of the present, we're really bound by the guardrails that we have. More often than not, I like to say, we just want to be likable. We want to make the decisions that get us the most likable outcome. And then in the future, the decisions that we make are so led by how we see the future. Is it an optimistic future where we have a vision for what we want to achieve, or are we feeling really uncertain and frightened by the future? So it's important to weigh all three of these things. And so when we look at the past for the food industry, I think what's really interesting is when you go back to the Fortune 500, which was a list of the most lucrative organizations in the 1950s in the US. They then created an international version of this list in the 1960s, right? So we're talking about 70 years ago. These were the companies that were on that list, right? It's a lot of food companies that are up there, and probably a lot of them might feel familiar to you even now. When we look at what's happening today, these are the food companies on the global Fortune 500 list. Not many, which is pretty stark if you think about it. Now, you can see some of the companies are still around, like General Foods was ultimately bought by Mondelez, and Nestle is still there, and they bought Ralston Purina. So there's a lot of consolidation. There's a lot of diversification that these big companies are making to be able to sustain their position. But you also see these food manufacturers, right? These ones up here. biggest food companies in the world, meat processing, food ingredients, right? Food farming. So the food landscape, the kinds of brands that we used to see really dominate in this space has changed. And the way that we talk about food has also changed. So one of the companies that you saw up there, Hormel, actually makes Spam. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Spam, but actually this is it right here. Now, Spam is obviously a kind of a tinned product. It's not the most glamorous thing in the world. It's not the healthiest thing in the world, arguably. But look at how beautiful and delicious you can make it look. Positioning is really important when we're talking about food and staying relevant with consumers. This on the left-hand side is actually a cell-based chicken, not real chicken, which is from a company called Good Meats that's trying to really revolutionize how we eat what we eat. And so part of the reason I say that is because, you know, it's equally important for us to look at the past when we're looking at the future and to understand that the past is not always a predictor. It can be an indication of where things are headed and why. But the future is not linear. Things are not just a linear trajectory into the future. And things can be very easily disrupted, especially in the food industry. So I've been in the food industry, as we just talked about, for about 15 years now, working for some of these major organizations. My background is actually in marketing and strategy and innovation, and then in the last 5 years inside of Foresight. So as I mentioned, I established and grew the Foresight function in McDonald's out of the head office and at Mars before that. However, I do a bunch of other stuff. However, what I have really noticed, whether it's in Foresight or whether it's in another function, is that the food industry has been wildly disrupted. So these are some of the categories that I've operated in. The Mexican food category, and obviously a huge opportunity in really modernizing and making Mexican food more authentic. Inside of the chocolate space, no longer is it just caramel and peanuts. We're thinking about pistachio cream. We're talking about dairy-free chocolate. So really the opportunities to be able to evolve some of these food categories is tremendous, but obviously there's also risk. So inside of confectionery, chewing gum used to be cool. It used to be something that young people wanted to be seen consuming. Now young people think of it as plastic that I'm putting inside of my body or that I'm leaving on the ground. And of course, McDonald's is the poster child for everything that could ever be wrong in the world. But it's also very different from a perceptual perspective when you think about birthday parties. You used to take your kids to McDonald's. Now we're thinking very differently about what we feed our children. And so when you think about this kind of massive disruption that's happening inside of the food space, this isn't just something that futurists are noticing. CEOs are noticing this too. So there's a PwC survey that comes out at the start of every year. If you don't read it, you absolutely should. It tells you globally, and then you can split it by market, what CEOs are worried about. And so what they've been telling us for a number of years is that they feel like their company is not going to be around in the next 10 years because of the pace of change, because of megatrends. Specifically, they're calling out that they don't think they'll be able to adapt and diversify their business fast enough in this current climate. And when they're looking at some of the risks that they're facing inside of their industry, there's a whole number of factors here. And I think what's really striking for me whenever I see something like this, which is World Economic Forum, AXA, whatever risk report you want to use, what you don't notice is food. Food is never listed as a risk, which is a little bit baffling for me because food is literally what sustains us. And yes, it's connected to a number of other factors like climate change, but in and of itself, it makes a huge impact. So when we're looking at the future of food, what we need to do is really zoom in and zoom out. So we need to look. So I've been talking to you about stuff that's really not directly food related for an intentional reason, is that we need to zoom in and zoom out across these different macro factors. And what's really helpful is when we look across paradigm shifts. So a paradigm shift being this massive disruption that's coming. So from moving away from what was normal before to what will be the new normal, or what is that massive disruption that's going to change the industry that we're looking at. So I'm going to share some of these with you.
Wenn du Unternehmer bist, wenn du Selbstständiger bist, wenn du mehr als 200.000 € Jahresumsatz hast, Und wenn du dich gerade fragst, wie führe ich KI in meinem Unternehmen ein, dann lade ich dich ein zu unserem kostenfreien Live-Webinar. Dort zeige ich dir meine 5-Säulen-Strategie, mit der Mittelständler gerade 300% Produktivitätssteigerung erreichen und das ohne neue Mitarbeiter einstellen zu müssen. Kein Blabla, keine Theorie, sondern konkrete Schritte, die du direkt umsetzen kannst. 2 Stunden Webinar, die dich 5 Jahre nach vorn bringen. Klick jetzt auf den Link in der Beschreibung und sei dabei. Ich freue mich auf dich.
So I'm going to share some of these with you inside of the food landscape, but I'm also going to share with you the paradoxes, because in between a paradigm shift lies a paradox. In other words, if you think about something like Jevons paradox, which specifically relates to technology but is applicable, when we start to create a new solution, it poses new problems. Particularly when we think about something that is scalable, more efficient, more affordable, it then basically poses its own set of challenges and consequences. So when we're looking at the future, it's important to bear that in mind. And we always like to start by looking at the consumer impact of things, because obviously consumer behavior can be the biggest driver inside of an industry. If nobody wants to buy it, then no one's going to innovate for it. No one's going to allow the infrastructure to enable it. And inside of that consumer landscape in food, we're noticing this massive paradigm shift away from consumers being carefree to being conscious. And that kind of conscientious behavior is a desire, but it's not really something that we're seeing just yet. It's something we've been talking about since the 1990s, is consumers wanting to make better choices with their food intake. However, it's challenging because people just want to get what they want as quickly and as easily as possible, and this is still true of the food landscape. If you think about something like GLP-1 drugs, they are a shortcut towards getting to a healthier outcome or helping me with my goals, right? So we're still very reliant on these sorts of shortcuts. So adaptogens, nootropics in food, all of these things are just boosters to help to supplement my behavior. And so one of the examples that we see here is companies really taking advantage of this, like Notco, which is a company out of Latin America that has created with their Giuseppe AI, so they have an AI platform that they've built that scans lots of different ingredients of food. They have created a GLP booster, which essentially is a botanical powder that you can add to any other food, hence like great money-making scheme here, that helps to stimulate GLP-1s naturally in your body. This is actually designed for people that are coming off GLP-1s, because what we notice in the food industry is that when you come off them, your consumption goes way back up. So they're trying to curtail that and help to balance that out. So as we move into the future, we will start to see these products that just help us to make these more conscientious choices in food, like we see with the Robert Downey Jr., who has just invested in this company called Happy with Craig Dubitsky. And essentially what it is a ready-to-drink coffee powder product. However, what they've done that's different is that they've actually partnered with the Mental Health Association to say, when you buy this product, you're giving back to an association that helps with mental health and loneliness. So the paradox here is, that's great, but you're still asking people to consume the same type of product. So as industries are creating these better propositions, it still poses similar problems. And then into the future, as we start to move into that more conscious and conscientious space, we'll continue to see this reliance on just make it easy for me, just help me to shortcut towards my goals, but in slightly different ways where technology plays a bigger role. So the example here is from Kirin Holdings, who is a company out of Japan. This product is an electric spoon that's on sale in 2 days. You can buy it for $150. And basically what it is it sends an electric current to your tongue, so that if you're eating food that has lower sodium content, it brings the sodium closer to your tongue so that you can taste it more. The idea is that you can have products that are formulated to have less salt, but you can still taste the saltiness, right? So we're trying to think of these really creative solutions to existing problems. And equally, when we think about solving problems, it's really up to the industry, the food industry, and big innovators, big brands to really help us to create these solutions. Now, right now, companies, like big food companies, are sitting over here. They're thinking about, how do I just be more responsible? That's the expectation. But in the future, they'll get desperate because the current food system that we have, we see it as being very predictable and very stable, but it absolutely is not. More than half of the world's energy comes from 3 food sources, and they're all in a pretty dire state in relation to farming, declining crop yields, et cetera. So a lot of these food categories that we have right now are just not sustainable. So we start with, a place that we're already in being more responsible, in categories like alternatives. So obviously things like alternative milks, plant-based meats and products. This is already a $26 billion category globally, and actually the biggest market is Europe. We have heard some kind of tension in this category, that it's not doing so well. That's because investment is down, but sales are up. Consumers are buying more and more of these products, 5% up last year. And companies are taking a lot of responsibility to make these products better. So the company like the one you see here, Eura, out of Spain, they're a great example of this because in many ways, they're investing in these products being more responsible, even more than the big food players that have been around for ages. They're thinking about, how do I make it more nutritious? How do I make sure that it's got a lower carbon footprint? How do I make it more affordable? They're really going the extra mile. But there will be a limitation with these products, which is why the future really relies on things like synthetic biology and cell-based meats, and cell-based products, I should say. And there's a lot more approvals and regulations to allow these products to get into consumer hands, which is really exciting. And the company that you see here is actually Vow from Australia, which is one of the 200 companies that we have today globally that is doing cell-based meat, versus 10 startups that we had in 2016. So we're seeing a lot more innovation in this space. However, it's also a paradox because these products are very intensive to make, and even as we scale the process to be able to make them, it's going to pose its own challenges. So in the future, we really need to rethink what a food product even is. If you think about back in the day, we used to create products based on what we had at hand, right? So we would bring together whatever ingredients we had, and that would be acceptable. Today, we have very strict standards over exactly what type of product composition I accept, or even how it should be packaged, how it should be priced, and that's obviously not sustainable. So we have a lot of really exciting innovation in this space where companies are rethinking, what even a coffee is. So Atomo Coffee is a company out of the US, and what they've actually done is created this beanless coffee. So it's 28 ingredients, and the main ingredient is actually repurposed date pits. So they've taken these pits that are usually sent to the landfill and created a coffee product. Then they roast it, they add caffeine, tastes amazing. The point of raising this is to say, if we're seeing coffee as being in a massive shortage situation, so at a point where we will no longer be able to get coffee by 2050, and 8 billion cups of coffee are consumed every single day, we're going to have to rethink what a coffee means to us, along with a bunch of other things. And obviously, innovation in this space, driven by the industry, is really important, and it needs to be aided by the government. So the last paradigm shift is really driven by governance and politics and governing bodies, which is this move away from freedom and a free market and do what you want, we want to grow, to we need to control the situation. Why? Because we're seeing the consequences of that. So one of the things that we have seen is this proliferation of the Western diet in many parts of the world, including obviously in the Asian region. That's obviously been driven by a lot of positive things in a way. Globalization, access to ingredients. In some cases, we just don't have the infrastructure to make food, right? We don't have the land, so we have to import it. Rising economic standards, all pretty positive things. But now we're seeing the consequences of that, the negative impacts. So a rise in metabolic diseases, chronic diseases. We see rising obesity rates, 1 billion people in the world obese today. Pre-diabetes is in a pretty massive spike right now. So what's happening is governments are starting to get access to long-term studies that are showing the negative impacts of that. And they're starting to think, okay, well, how do we actually curtail this situation? So, okay, let's label the products. Let's restrict how people can market the products. Let's put a tax on specific ingredients, right? In other words, it's just a Band-Aid to the bigger problem that we have. So what's going to happen in the future when we have these studies that are coming out around ultra-processed foods, around plastic in our foods, there's now plastic in our bodies, and companies are being taken to court by consumers because the government is not taking action. The paradox here is obviously as we're trying to create more innovation to solve for a lot of these problems, who's responsible for making sure that the guardrails are in place? And so when we think about the future, I think what's really exciting is while we talk about it moving into a state of control, greater sense of control, what we see is huge amounts of innovation here that enable that control to sit with the consumer, with us. So the company that you see here is called January AI. It's an AI-driven nutritional platform created with peer-reviewed studies. So it's not just an AI that sources nutritional information online. It's from accredited nutritionists. And it makes it really easy for consumers to get the information that's tailored to them around their diet and what they eat. So there's a blood glucose tracker that you attach to the app. You put in your metabolic specific information. You put in your goals, your history. And then when you're eating something, you just scan it. And it'll pick it up and say, you know what, your blood glucose is going to spike if you have this cupcake. Go and have this instead. So it's very tailored, it's very personalized, and it's very credible, which is where we see the future of this heading. What's really exciting about how technology is playing a role in here is that even if you think about the Apple study that's now taking place with 350,000 people leveraging their iPhone health app, their AirPods, and the smartwatch, it's the most amount of data that we've ever had to be able to analyze behavior changes with consumers through the use of technology. So it's a new frontier, which is kind of an apt way to end, because January AI was actually named after Janus, who is the guardian of time, right? If you think about January, new beginnings, a new way to think about the future. However, just because I talked about all of these examples doesn't mean that this is absolutely going to happen. One thing that we often talk about in Foresight is that the only certainty is uncertainty. And just because you can see something doesn't mean it's going to happen or it's going to happen right away. So what we often like to talk about is the conditions that enable some of these futures. So something like scenario planning is a really helpful exercise for us. For example, if we see a greater loosening of government guardrails, that means they'll just step back and let the innovative companies create solutions to problems. But a continued spike in consumer behavior and consumption, which is likely, that's where a product like a beanless coffee can really flourish. We'll see a growth of that exponentially. However, if we see government really take more of an ownership position, like we're seeing in the US, and consumption declines because consumers are becoming more educated about the consequences of their eating habits, that's where something like technology really comes to shine, particularly when it's partnering with some of those government initiatives. We don't know what the future holds. It's important to look at, as I said before, past, present, and future, and it's important to think about the conditions that really enable these futures. But one thing is for sure, and that is that the food industry will have a huge impact on our lives. In fact, it is the single strongest lever to optimize human health and environmental sustainability on Earth, and I would say one of the biggest levers in our happiness. Thank you. Thank you.
So we have time for some questions. Thank you so much for giving us this I would like to start with the point of personalization, because this is obvious that AI and digitalization and AI leads to personalization. In your example, the case of personalization was that the tool, the AI, recommends a person to eat this or this or this or this. But still, this or this or this or this are maybe standardized products. Only the one is better for me or fits my actual behavior better than me. In our studies, in other industries, not in food, but in other industries, we came up with the term adaptive products, which means the product adapts to the personal, to individual and situative needs, which we call adaptive. What do you think? Is this also a concept which could be seen in food?
Na, was sagst du? Ich sage dir, was viele Unternehmer sagen. Die sagen, ich habe verstanden, dass KI wichtig ist, aber ich weiß nicht, wo ich anfangen soll, damit richtig was rauskommt. Wenn dir das genauso geht, dann habe ich einen Tipp. Starte mit der 5-Säulen-Strategie. Und zwar mit einem Online-Kurs zur 5-Säulen-Strategie. Die 5-Säulen-Strategie ist unser bewährtes Framework, mit dem wir täglich KI-Projekte in hunderten Unternehmen umsetzen. Ganz einfach erklärt, praxisnah und sofort anwendbar. Du findest diesen Online-Kurs hier in der Beschreibung.
I think it would be really nice to have that in food, but our current food systems are just not that sophisticated. That's why we opt for things like boosters and supplements, and what can I add to the product? What can I take out of the product? The food industry, I'm really sad and sorry to say, is just not that advanced to be able to offer that kind of tailoring and personalization. The other thing that I think is really interesting is that even though consumers say that they want more personalization, or people, right, like I want to know if you've got an Oura ring, I can see some people wearing it. I want to know exactly how many hours I'm sleeping and my breath rate and my blood glucose spikes. And then what do you do with that information? You don't usually even change your habits with that. Yeah. So I think it's a goal for us to do better, to make better choices with more information about ourselves. But ultimately, because we have all of these other factors playing into our lives, so many decisions, right? 10,000 decisions every single day. Rising anxiety, everything's costing more, everything's becoming disconnected from us with technology. There are just so many other factors that take away from that ambition to personalize.
Yeah. Maybe another look at, or another angle to look from at this could be that AI is in many cases, when AI digitalized human senses, so the sense of my eyes, because AI sees with cameras, and AI hears, and so on. But the taste, our taste sense, is still not really digitalized. So if AI could understand what really is my personal taste. Maybe also adaptive. Maybe my taste, my perfect taste this morning is another than the evening. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe if we could understand this, then there could be another another push into personalized products, because yes, people would probably use this. Do you know any cases, any projects which are successful or which could be successful to digitalize our taste?
There are definitely things happening with taste manipulation or digitizing, like a virtual version of our taste buds. Almost like a synthesized version. So there's definitely a lot happening in that. The Kirin example, I think, is another great one where we're trying to mimic specific taste profiles. I think that you're right that we'll see a greater personalization there. If you look at something like the fragrance industry, they're really great at being able to provide that. Even now, they're experimenting with creating a scent that is specifically tailored to your physiology and what your body reacts better to, and your personality. And then the scent is designed on the spot. Like we've seen that, like I had that in Dubai when I was there. Yeah. So I think that there's definitely the possibility for the food industry to be inspired by that.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. So when I'm looking, and we also invested in food tech companies, and we do a lot of studies on food. And when I'm thinking about food, so as a futurist, of course, as you said, we have to understand the future forces. So what is driving the trend? Not only the shiny trend, but what is driving the trend? So what would you say? Who is the main driving force in the international food industry? Is it the big corporates, the McDonald's, or is it the? It's probably not VC, venture capital, but who? If not the big one, if not the venture capital, who is it?
I think it's the big companies. I think it's all the food companies, actually, big and small. And that's part of the reason why I love working within businesses and with businesses, because I believe that private organizations have a massive role to play and hold a huge amount of responsibility. I mean, even if you think about a company like Coca-Cola and the kinds of habits that they've created, the rituals that they've created, and now, Google, Coca-Cola, and everything that's happening in the news right now. Now they're trying to think about fixing some of the problems that they've created. So it kind of goes back to foresight, is when you're a massive organization or where you're a new, small food startup, how do you think just a little bit ahead and understand that whatever you create could have a massive implication on people's behavior? Because food, this is something that we talked about a lot, particularly in the chocolate category, because chocolate has some bad stuff about it, but when everybody thinks of chocolate, they get really happy. You probably have a smile on your face thinking about chocolate, right? Because it's associated with so many positive memories with your childhood, with your family, with special occasions, with a treat for yourself. It's beautiful, and it's important for us to hold that responsibility with just as much weight. So all of the positive associations that a category creates and the negative consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a little bit surprised of the 42% of CEOs who basically tell if they follow their today's strategy, the company will die.
Yeah. And three quarters of them are acutely aware of the pace of change and don't feel like they're catching up to it, which is a part of the reason why we have a demand for foresight.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Let's get to the cell-based area, because of course this was a big hype in the previous years, and as you mentioned, it among consumers it's still growing. But in the investment scene, they have a tough time. The companies who founded this. So what would be your advice to a founder in this category, in this cell-based category? What to do now?
Well, cell-based or alternatives, I think both categories, like a plant-based version of the product or cellular made. And by the way, cellular, I think cell-based meat in particular, not many people know how that product is actually created. And when you look into it, it's quite obvious that it's very nascent and fringe and still evolving. But I think in both categories, when I've been speaking to the founders of a lot of these organizations, I am floored by their passion to progress the food industry. So they get a lot of criticism, they get pushback, particularly from the agriculture industry, or they think from the big food brands, et cetera. But they're doing it for really amazing reasons to really shift the food industry, because we need to produce 70% more food to feed the growing population with the same amount of resources. It's impossible. It's literally impossible.
70%.
So
70.
Yeah,
okay.
And we have declining crop yields. We have unpredictable weather. We have $18 billion climate events that have impacted the food industry in the last decade. We just can't do it. This is the really interesting thing for me with food, is we see it as like, oh, the food industry's been around for ages. No, it hasn't. Modern day food production is very modern, and it's just not sustainable.
Okay, but what's the way? The world population is growing up to
population
up to 11 billion, maybe 10, maybe I don't know. Nobody knows, but exactly how will we manage to feed them all?
Well, we're going to need different solutions, right? So we don't have enough land. We have declining crop yields, so we can't just farm things the way that we used to farm them. Meat consumption is just not a sustainable thing. But when we then switch all of that over to plant proteins, that's also, when you scale that, that's also not sustainable. Yeah. That goes back to your question about cellular agriculture and some of the like vertical farming, different ways of farming, different way of producing foods. And then ultimately, it also needs to be the consumer. It needs to be all of us in consuming less, wasting less. A third of the world's food is wasted after it's produced, like it's thrown out into landfill. So, I mean, all of that to say, you know, I think, it's a pretty dire and concerning situation, but there are a lot of really great innovations that are trying to
absolutely. But why in this situation, knowing all this amazing foresight stuff, why the big food companies are not heavily investing into fermenters and all the cellular stuff?
It's a really big question.
It is, yeah. But you can answer this maybe.
Big food companies are reliant on, you know, when I showed the decision-making of the past, they're very wedded to that, and they're very wedded to the expectations of the present. The reality is that when you have a massive organization that employs 500,000 people around the world, right, and it doesn't just make burgers, it makes, you know, like creates livelihood for literally millions of people, serves 8 billion people every day, you know, that's a big responsibility for a company to put that at risk, for a leadership team or a CEO to put that at risk. And so I think that decisions are weighed very carefully inside of a big business, and safer decisions are usually chosen. And that's where you need innovators, you need creative people, you need visionaries to come in and help business leaders to think differently about generating new growth. So, you know, sometimes people say that big companies are complacent and they only think short term, they just care about the money. You know, average tenure of a CEO is 5 years, so they're going to be gone soon, they don't care. I don't think that that's true. When you speak to these people, they genuinely care, they want to leave a legacy. You know, they're in the business because they care about it and they care about the people. And so you just have to give them a really compelling business case of how they can make money off of this, right? Yeah. So how is this a growth avenue?
Good, so let's work on this. Okay. Okay. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I hope we work together in the future as well. Give her some hands, thank you, and we come to the next step. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Wenn dir dieses Video gefallen hat, dann lade ich dich ganz persönlich ein. Komm zum Rule Breaker Zukunftskongress im nächsten Jahr, weil da gibt es mehr davon. Dieser Rule Breaker Zukunftskongress ist kein Kongress wie jeder andere. Das ist ein Ort, an dem du die Zukunft deiner Branche verstehst, gestaltest und manchmal sogar neu denkst. Die Agenda wird wieder voll sein von Rule Breakern, Visionären, Technologen aus aller Welt, von echten Unternehmern. Hol dir jetzt dein Ticket und ich verspreche dir, das wird sich absolut lohnen. Den Link findest du in der Videobeschreibung und über den eingeblendeten QR-Code.